Hello, my fellow readers. Dark Symphony 777 with another fanfiction review. As always, a link to the story will be in the description below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, click on that bell for notifications, leave a comment in the comment section below on your thoughts of the story, and finally, this is my opinion. My opinion is not indicative of everyone in the world, so please respect that. Right now, if you don't notice, because I don't have my camera on, I have my Junko Fumo right on my knee because this is very much relevant to this conversation, to this review, for me to have my Fumo. I mean, or not. This is Eternally Pure Enemy by Penumbral Peroxide. This is a Touhou fanfiction starring Junko and Reisen for some reason. I don't know why, but let's actually get into the review. So there is actual context I need to actually talk about when it comes to this specific story. It's very much relevant because here's the thing. In Touhou, in the mainline Touhou games, a lot of the plots are very, very simple. They're not really that deep into things. Like, for instance, in Embodiment of Scarlet Devil, the first official soft reboot game, i.e., the first Windows game, the entire plot is just a vampire just shrouded the area in like red mist because she just wanted to go out. Or Mountain of Faith, the 10th game in the series, whose whole plot is just the fact that Rimu gets very, very butthurt over a green-haired girl just randomly showing up at her place saying, this shrine is self-controlled by Lady Kanako. And Rimu was like, fuck you say? and decided to commit violence because, of course, she does. Granted, there is more meaning behind that because of the whole social, religious shakeup of the whole dynamic, because the whole thing. Because there is now like a new religion just barging into the area, and then the next game has fucking a nuclear bird, and then the next two games after that are like even more religions joining. Ha! But the 15th game, on the other hand, Legacy of Lunatic Kingdom, is very, very, very different from the rest of the plots up to this point. It's about genocide. It's just straight up about murder. You have, instead of, oh, we're going to do this thing that's mildly inconveniencing people, oh, we have to stop this crazy psychotic woman from murdering some lady on the moon, which will eventually cause us to get murdered because the people on the moon are like invading us, so we have to deal with that shit. Again, there's more in depth, like the implication that they don't really want to invade. They're only really invading, quote unquote, to kind of get the people on the earth to kind of go after the person in charge of the whole thing, which is Lady Junko, and technically Ekatia Lapis Lazuli. Yeah, that's a full name, but that's it. That being said, that's not all with this game. This is also the first mainline game where you get to play as everyone's favorite rabbit, Reisen, Udangi, and Naba. And here's Reisen, her lovable bunny self, and also here's Junko, a very exaggerated Junko. This is like the only picture of these two that I could find off a quick glance that didn't involve ear eating, because a lot of people like to draw Junko eating Reisen's ears for reasons that will forever elude me. But that brings us back to this story. So, why do I have to bring all this context up? Well, in Touhou 15, you actually get to play as Reisen in the game, and you actually progress through her story. This game is going to the assumption that Reisen's story is the one that happened, because there's, I think, like 4 storylines. There is Rimu's story, there's Marissa's story, Sane's story, and then Reisen's story. I think those are the stories that are actually in the game, but this story is going under the assumption that Reisen was the one that happened. Why am I bringing that up? Because at the end of Reisen's story, the entire dynamic of Junko and Reisen actually falls under this specific conversation right here between Reisen Inaba, Reisen Udange Inaba, and Hekatia Lepazuli at the end of Touhou 15, where Junko has clearly developed a interest in Reisen. And eventually, the fan base are gonna fan base, and they over exaggerated the whole thing. Like, I don't know, making Junko a very lusty woman. Now, I bet you're wondering why I brought all this up. The reason being is this dynamic kind of defines what this story is about. In awkwardly one of the worst ways possible. Let me explain. When it comes to the plot of Eternally Pure Enmity, the plot is as follows. After a long day of work between Irie Nakagoro and Reisen Udange Inaba, Reisen decides to go to sleep. Also ignore the prompt that I downloaded early days collection from Yu-Gi-Oh! Ignore that. After getting a minor amount of sleep, Reisen wakes up thirsty in the middle of the night, tries to get some water, and then she finds out that Junko has basically appeared before her and wants to capture her. Reisen tries to defend herself, but Junko, being Junko, captures her. Inaba, the other rabbit, asshole, tries to save Reisen, but gets burned for her troubles, and she runs away scared. Junko then kidnaps Reisen to her home in a place called Sekai, where her clown piece and Hekatia all live. All the while, Tei gets both Kaguya Harusian's and Iron's attention with the whole deal as they try and work out a deal. Here's the issue with the plot. Why is Reisen involved with the story? When I honestly finished the plot, there was no point that Reisen needed to be involved in the story at all. This story could have easily been just based around Junko and Ekatia as they want to assault the Lunarian capital. That's fine. I will be completely fine with that because that's basically the bulk of the story. Basically, they just assault the cap. Even like Junko's whole plan in the story is just bum rush Chang'e's jail cell. Why do I have to bring up the jail cell? It's actually because of Junko's backstory. See, when it comes to Junko's backstory, it's actually one of the more complicated backstories in Gensokyo in any Touhou character. Basically, she was a Chinese princess who was married to a man named Hori. Meanwhile, Hori was also seeing a woman named Chang'e. Now, in real life Chinese mythology, Tori was actually two different people, but for the sake of complicating things, Zun decided to combine Hori into the two Horis into one Hori. Basically, Hori was ordered by Chang'e to shoot down a bunch of suns that were slowly burning Earth away. By doing so, one of the suns that he shot down killed Hori and Junko's son. Junko, overwrought with depression and also very scorned, used her powers of purification to purify herself to such a primordial level that she essentially became a god of spite. Now all she has left is hatred and spite, not only for Hori, who she does canonically kill in the games. This is actually canon. She murders someone. This bitch murders someone, but also plans an entire mass invasion of the lunar capital in order to kill Chang'e as well, due to the simple fact that Chang'e was the one who ordered Hori to shoot down the suns. Hekatia has her own reasons for wanting Chang'e as well, mainly to the fact that one of the cells weakened hell, and she kind of got pissed off, and she kind of got hosed mad about that. But this is not about Hekatia, it is about Junko. Junko stands out as a very tragic and dark Touhou character compared to all the happy and mystical and whimsical characters that the series is known for. It's what makes Junko stand out amongst every single other character. She is just that woman. Going back to this story, the entire plot happened because Junko decides to kidnap Reisen. But Reisen doesn't really factor into any point of the plot. Junko kidnaps plot, brings her to her home. They kind of just talk a bit, and kind of Reisen tries to escape. Reisen gets shot in the leg for her troubles. Junko heals the wound. Then we get a large cutback to Iron and Kaguya looking for Reisen, and Tay kind of humiliating herself by wearing Reisen's peddler outfit, which also has nothing to do with this story at all. Like seriously, why? Okay, it's a funny image of seeing Tay just wear get these too large for her outfit because Tay kind of looks like a child, because that's how Tay rolls, because she's kind of a bitch. Fuck Tay. Fuck her. But again, what does it have to do with the story? With Iron and Kaguya, okay, it makes a little bit of sense why we're getting stuff from their perspective as they're trying to warn the Lunarians of Junko kidnapping Reisen, so they automatically assume Junko's probably going to assault them. That doesn't work because guess what? The warning that they do is intercepted by Hecatea, as well as when they try to restart the Imperishable Night incident, Clown Peach stalls them long enough in order to make it all worthless to prevent any interference. All right, I can see the whole point of it, but again, that brings back the point and the big plot hole in the room. Why specifically Reisen? When Junko and Hecatea assault the Lunarian capital, Reisen starts to actually wonder, why was she grabbed in the first place? And this is something that is actually addressed throughout the last couple of paragraphs of the story. Why was she grabbed? She had no reason to be here. Junko easily could have grabbed someone else. Even at the end, Junko, as before Reisen can get sent home back to Gensokyo, she wonders, why did Junko bring her? It's because of the whole dynamic between Reisen and Junko. Because for some reason, I think the author really wanted to have a Junko story, but realized Reisen's like so connected with Junko through the fandom that the author kind of just threw Reisen in, and just because reasons. I think that ultimately dooms the story from a plot point, because at no point did Reisen ever factor, along with the fact that literally half of the story didn't focus on Reisen. Why, why make this story when only half of the story focuses on Reisen, and the other half focus on stuff that has nothing to do with her, or nothing to do with the situation at hand? In the case of Tay, I don't know. My best bet is fandom nonsense. I will say the idea of the story is fine. I have no problem with the idea of Junko deciding, like, okay, I waited long enough, I'm just gonna bum rush him, see what happens. Because Law K is was a massive, complicated plan of her just slowly filling the Lunarian capital with unpure fairies and to drive the Lunarians away, so that way she can just kind of march up to the Chinese yell sound, just kill her. Like, you die now. No! No! And all that jazz. So having a more straightforward, just bum rush the whole thing and see where we go with this makes sense. Canonically, it wouldn't work, mainly because of the fact Chingy can't die. Chingy drank the Horai elixir, which grants permanent immortality from anything. Both Kaguya and another character named Moku no Fujiwara both drank it as well, and they have lived for literally ever. They cannot die. Chingy probably only drank the elixir because she was worried because she found that Junko was pretty much going after her. So that's a precaution. So I can see So I can see the whole idea behind it, like especially since Junko's power of purification could possibly nullify the Horizon elixir. So it's like, all right, I can see a little wiggle room involved there, but again, it has again, what does Reisen have to do with this? Why does Reisen have to do with any of this? You could have just focused on Junko as a character, and honestly, it would have been a much more coherent story. When it comes to the characters, I actually like the characters. Granted, they're nothing groundbreaking, and the author goes ahead and tries to keep them as close to canon as possible, meaning Junko's pretty much a flat character. Reisen is something of a butt monkey. Hekatia is probably the most interesting character because her whole three body shtick has different personalities, and I think that's a neat idea that I think should be explored more in Touhou related media. I think it's nice. Iron, Kaguya, even Tay being a little brat. They're all very in character. The only character that I do want to talk about with this is Junko. Now, when it comes to writing fan fiction, certain characters are more harder to write than others. This is why OOC exists, i.e., out of character, where characters don't act like they're actually supposed to because it's for the sake of fun, whether or for the sake of wanting to take a character in a different direction. By keeping him in canon, Junko becomes a much more difficult character to write because of how she is written in the game. Junko's whole deal as a character is the fact that she's literally a one-dimensional villain. And that's fine. Again, that brings back to the point where I said about earlier why Junko is technically her. Junko stands out because she's so drastically different from every other villain. This flatness is another reason for that, because there's an actual in-universe reason why she's a flat character. She's purified herself to the point that she literally doesn't really know anything except for hatred and spite for Changi. To the point where she doesn't really know how to behave any other way when it comes to personality, when it comes to character, or even emotions. She's technically a borderline empty shell. Again, it works for Junko because it works in context. If you want to have Junko be like a lusty woman, or even like a weird goofy character, yeah, that's perfectly fine in canon. I mean, not in canon, in fan fiction because of fan interpretations. It just kind of, and I'm not really gonna blame the author for this because he wanted to keep Junko in canon. It's more, this is more of an observation, more or less. When it comes to grammar and writing, I think the writing is pretty well. I think the grammar is done well. I don't really see any issues with that. When it comes to the pacing, it is a very slower paced story. However, I do want to bring attention to two specific tags mentioned in this, more or less for context in this part of the video. That being psychological torture and torture. Now, these are heavy topics that need to be discussed very lightly. Here's the thing: there's barely any torture of any kind in the story. When it comes to torture, I'm going to assume it's the physical kind of torture. Right? The only physical abuse Reisen gets from Junko is a shot in the leg, which not only does Junko heal immediately, but is only done because in the context of the story, Junko tries to make a breakaway. Not Junko. Reisen tries to make a getaway. But that's really it. That's not really torture. Abuse maybe, or assault, but torture, no. Psychological torture as well is a very much stretch because so much of the story is not focused on Reisen, and even by the end, she's just kind of done with everything. So she just kind of gives up and just now it just wants to see Omar wants to see this whole thing through the end because she realizes once Junko gets her hands on Changi, Reisen can just go home. Again, there's nothing to do with psychological torture because Reisen is only featured in about half of the story, and even then, it doesn't really go into in depth of the care in terms of psychological torture. That's it. She's just kind of dragged along for a ride, and which is typical of a lot of fandom's interpretations of Junko and Reisen. But again, it's not torture. It's just, at best, you can call it mild abuse. And even then, it works for Reisen because Reisen's whole thing in the canon is that she's kind of a bump monkey. She kind of gets beat up. There's even a manga, a comedy manga that's canonicity is kind of dubious, where she kind of gets bullied a lot by Tay. So it's not really too big a leap to kind of interpret this as just simply Reisen getting bullied because she's Reisen. And keep in mind, I like Reisen. I like Junko. I like them both. But this is not the way to do things. If you're going to write a story focused on Junko's revenge on Chingy, and she needed Reisen in order to accomplish that goal, then you should have had. Then honestly, there should have been a logical way to have Reisen better implemented into the story, and that includes the torture. If you wanted to torture Reisen, you could have just simply had more focus on Reisen's treatment at Senkai. She was pretty much ignored for the most part. She had tea. She just like a single wound in the leg. It's not torture. It's just getting shot. Really, since everyone follows Damaku. Granted, in canon, Junko and Hecatea wouldn't really care about Damaku because the spell card rules only apply to Gensokyo. Junko and Hecatea are not part of Gensokyo. They're basically in their own world, separate from Gensokyo. So if we follow canon, they could just straight up kill everyone on the moon. They don't even need to do Danmaku. They just bitch slap or punch people. Like they can just do that. Now I will say in terms of torture, there is mild torture involving Hecatea wrapping the chains around her planets to Reisen's arms and tightening them when Junko doesn't get her answer. But again, that's very mild. And yes, that would warrant the torture tag, even if very dubiously, but it wouldn't warrant the psychological torture tag, which doesn't really factor in everything because Reisen kind of just gives up because she admits that she'll probably just go home once this whole deal is done. That's not how psychological torture works. That's just kind of just being done with it. So, that being said, would I recommend the story? If we're looking at the story from a writing perspective, from a purist writing perspective, it's written very well. The characters are clear, they're concise, they're very realistic to what they're meant to be in canon. However, from an enjoyment standpoint, this story is just a big pile of nothing. Nothing really goes on. There's not really enough focus on Reisen to kind of get a feel for what's going on because so much is focused on Kaguya and Iron and Tay and even on Moku that it detracts from the story. Do I have a favorite part? Probably the fight between Iron and Clown Piece in the middle, where they're about to start the Imperishable Night incident again. Clown Piece interrupts, basically fucks with them, and then she gets completely bodied because she got a bit off more than she could chew. Because even like an insane Iron basically just turns from a kind and caring very old woman with a bow and arrow into the medic from Team Fortress 2. Lack of sanity and all. Is there anything I would do to fix this story? Honestly, I would simply just have Reisen be a more important part of the story. The torture tags could be up to interpretation, so I don't really want to touch them. But I do think that Reisen should be in a more important part of the story. You can probably keep the Iron stuff and the Kaguya stuff. Maybe get rid of Tay in the outfit, funny as that is. But honestly, making Reisen more integral to the story instead of just being just there would have made more sense in the context of the story, considering the fact the whole point of the story is that Junko is kidnapping Reisen to help her get revenge. Wouldn't it make more sense for Reisen to be actually important to the plan? No. So that is my review of Eternally Pure Enemy. So this has been Dark Symphony 7. So 7 and hold on, wait a minute. One more thing I would want to change. Have Tay get her ass kicked. Preferably by Junko.